No, seriously though, why do we still make games that look like this in the year 2025? Is it laziness, nostalgia bait, petulant hipster rebellion against the balloon and budgets of the AAA world? I mean, yeah, a little, though it may, but probably shouldn't surprise you. There are also a lot of rational and pragmatic reasons. Some of them really are dead simple, such as, it's faster to produce, it's easier to edit and iterate on, it's existed for a relatively long time without changing a whole lot, so the standards are set and understood. But as an over-analytical internet nano-personality, it is both my nature and my very duty to expound. So please, humor my ramblings, and subscribe to my channel. Apparently fortune favors those who remind you it's free and reversible. Now that might sound like some kind of corporate buzzword, but I assure you, I literally just made it up. And more importantly, the principle's simple. As a one-man developer, or the director of a small team, you should build your audiovisual style around things that take more talent, rather than raw time and money, to improve. That is to say, technique over process. Now obviously something more polished is going to take a bit more time to make no matter what, to say nothing of the time it actually takes to build up your skills in the first place. Nevertheless, there certainly are things that lean more to one end of the spectrum than the other, and if you have limited funds or staff to work with, the technique end is always worth prioritizing. Looking at the more specific concept of character sprites, some good examples of technique-oriented improvements are placement of highlights and shadows, color choice, clarity of what action keyframes represent, how much personality and appeal poses convey, and finally, abstraction of fine details. On the flip side, some examples of process-oriented improvements are sprite resolution, color count, number of frames per animation, and percentage of a new frame drawn from scratch. Unlike the previous category of improvements, all these inherently add extra mouse clicks to your process, and clicks are time, and time is money. Or, if you ain't the money type, time is between the project you're on right now and the super cool next big thing you've been aching to start on from week one of the thing you're currently doing. The long and short of it is that while technique does take time and effort to improve, the improvements you make are permanent to you and can be applied to make your next asset more elegantly in the same amount of time. Meanwhile, extra process is always inherently more work than the alternative. Put it in gaming terms, it's like the difference between leveling up your character's defense and just buying more health potions. But I hear you asking, why not focus on both? Well, that's where I'd like to hit you with another principle that I've seen happen a lot that I've never heard a name put to. You know the old adage about how games that eschew stylization for realism look incredible in the moment but age poorly? Well, tackling a style you were never equipped to pull off in the first place will produce the same effect instantly, no aging required. Stylistic diminishing returns, a term I've coined to explain why you can produce god-tier pixel art with a fraction of the time and budget required for cheap-looking hand-drawn assets. Essentially, the more detailed your base style is, the more individual assets you'll need to draw to make your game world look filled out and lively. The more realistic and high-res your grass style is, the cheaper it'll look if you copy-paste the same two decorative grass tufts. The less your characters look like SNES assets and the more they look like Disney drawings, the more frames of Disney-quality animation people are going to expect. More goes into a game like Cuphead than talent, heart, and a distinct style. A lot more. Specifically, a lot more are two things we all only have so much of and most of us don't have enough of. Trying to make a game that looks like Cuphead or Hollow Knight will probably land you with a game people will call a cheap knockoff of Cuphead or Hollow Knight. Trying to make a game that looks like Cuphead or Hollow Knight will probably land you with a game people compare to a cheap copy of Cuphead or Hollow Knight. But it won't have been cheap for you, whether you paid in money or time. It's also worth noting that trying to make a game that looks like Cuphead or Hollow Knight will land you with a game people will call a cheap knockoff of Cuphead or Hollow Knight. Make a game that looks like Cuphead or Hollow Knight with a game people compare to a cheap copy of Cuphead. It's also worth noting that while admittedly less my field of expertise, most of these principles apply to 3D art as well. Granted, it seems somewhat easier to find ready-made 3D assets that can fit or be repurposed to fit multiple styles, so asset volume ain't the biggest worry. Still, if you aren't particularly confident with your animating skills, or you're going for a very specific style, don't go outside your means in terms of model and texture detail. Another trap that 3D art opens you up to is the temptation to use 2.5D for games that could've, and should've, probably just been 2D. It can be easier and cheaper than hand-drawn and still look decent, but by going that route you're still setting up expectations for more detail than you might be willing to provide. Provided, of course, you don't stylize around your limitations cleverly. And you know what? Expectations. Boy, that's a whole other tangent I could break off on, but suffice it to say this. The lowest rated games on Steam ain't the worst ones, they're the ones that disappointed the hardest. And as an indie whose success, let's face it, mainly hinges on white-knuckling your way up the word-of-mouth climbing wall until you can impress the friends of popular YouTubers, managing expectations is doubly important. Well, that was a bit of a shorter topic, but not everything always needs to be a 20-minute larynx buster. Hope I could enlighten you on the slightly less obvious details of a really obvious question and leave you with some food for thought. I guess the big moral takeaway of today's story is, no. We're not always trying to call back to the glory days of your SNES nostalgia. Sometimes a game of 2x2 pixels is so retro, but sometimes a game of 2x2 pixels is just a game of 2x2 pixels. That's all for now, though. Talk at you later. No, seriously, though, why do we still make games that look like cheap copy of Cuphead or Hollow Knight in the year 2020? Cheap-looking hand-drawn ass.